Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. I am super excited for this episode. This was inspired by someone who wrote in and had some questions. I'm going to let this one be a little more free flow, but what we are going to talk about is your art, your creativity, your ideas, and what happens when you fucking hate it. Like, we've all been there where we've been highly invested in something. We thought it was absolutely brilliant. It took a ton of time, energy, potentially resources. We told everybody about it. And then we get to this wall in it, and whether it's a block and we don't know what to do, where to from here, whether it just suddenly gets stanky and we don't want to do it anymore, or maybe we just like get distracted by another sparkly thing. And it can feel a lot of ways, right? Like, we have a lot of narratives around that. And having supported the creative process in so many different ways, being a creative myself, I think there's some interesting takeaways when we hit that spot. And the thing is, there's no silver bullet, right? So I'm going to talk about how you can resource yourself, what it means, why you should or shouldn't keep on keeping on, and how to know the difference. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I never want to tell you what to do, right? Like, it is not for me to tell you the answer, to tell you what to do next, where you're going, how you're going to get there. Sure, I have some ideas, but when it comes to you and your process and where you're at and what next, the hard part is, my friend, you're in charge. And I love to facilitate. If you ask me a question, I guarantee you I have a fucking answer. And it could be really, really wrong. So please, forever and always, when you hear me, when you tune into me, allow me to be a true sounding board. If it resonates, cool, riff on it. If it pisses you off, awesome, fight against it. Like, defend yourself. That no, that is not for me, is as powerful as that's cool, let's try that, you know? And what happens when you actually disagree is that you give yourself the resourcing and the confidence, like you give that back to you, right? And I don't know, kind of knowing what you don't want, I find that to be just as useful as figuring it out what I do. In fact, it's more powerful because I usually feel a lot more sure of that than I do the other things. So I say that because creativity it's like magic. That's why I'm so obsessed with it. It feels like something bigger than me, like something that I've tuned into. Some of the artists I used to work with called it like the greater groove in the sky, right? And we'll talk a little bit about some of those examples, some weller known more reputable creatives and how they kind of harness this energy or the lack thereof. But an artist reached out to me and said, I've got a lot of creative projects that just feel stale. And some of them might even feel like they are molding and rotting. And I feel bad, like it was my neglect that got them to this place. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to like eat that medicine. I feel like I can't do anything new because I've got all this other stuff and like kind of holding me back. Like what do you do with that, right? And you know what I'm going to say next? You do you, boo. No, but for real, it's gonna be a little bit different, not just for you, but based on those projects. And this is where like really understanding, as I like to say, the frequency of that experience for you helps, because some things you might be scared of. Some things might actually just be done and dead and rotting. Some things might just be on a creative hiatus. They might just be percolating, incubating, rising. Like, it just might not be their time yet. And you might need that space from those endeavors to actually create the recipe for your next big thing, as I like to call it. It's like really hard to know. So firstly, let's kind of talk about those frequencies, right? And like what you might be tuning into. And then you're going to get to really feel into, when you hear me say it, like feel it in your body. Like do your toes curl? I get like full body goosebumps. It tends to feel really tingly for me when I'm like onto something. And then I kind of I feel it like more in my gut. If it's like ooh, I don't know, or like my brain, my ego will kind of kick in. So just as you hear me kind of walk through what typically is happening in my experience, at the very least, which is the very least, when we don't want to do the thing we've been doing for a while, or we hate it, or it doesn't feel like it's enough, or it just needs one more tweak, or we just want to share it and get more validation, or we don't want anyone to ever see it or hear it or taste it or feel it, like for ... right? Like whoo. I think all pretty relatable and part of the creative process, right? So we've got this thing, we've got a handful of things. I'm just going to talk about it singular. Otherwise I'll just get lost in the weeds with it. But we've had this idea we've been working on. We've brought it at least into fruition. There's some physical form of it in this world. We're tweaking it. We're improving upon it. And we get to this place where it grosses us out. We don't want to do it anymore. We have narratives and stories around it. And so when I ask you to like tune into the truth, the story, the feeling, the frequency behind it, let's start with this concept of like comparisonitis, enoughness. Does it need one more tweak? Do we need to take it back into the studio? Do we need to spend one more day on it, right? And like really, like how true is that? Because this is going to be truly you could probably just stick with this one piece of consideration, this point of evaluation, this filter, and not really need to go any further with it. Because this, when I talk about this frequency, like you can feel this very distinctly, but it takes a lot of experience to understand, am I using external judgment, fear, comparisonitis, enoughness, imposter syndrome, or does this really just need one more step? I feel that for me, and like I get really frustrated, I get bored, I get distracted, I'm not feeling it anymore. And so the way I simply test this is just one more step, 10 more minutes. Like I can start to feel that energy kind of subside. It feels like the tide is going out. Like I've been on a fucking roll. I'll get into that into a second, but like it's slowing, right? And that's kind of when was this good enough? Do we need another edit? Should we try it again? Sleep on it. Those are different questions that will run through my mind. They might show up a lot louder and a lot more critical and a lot more fear-based for you. Am I comparing myself to others? Am I comparing myself to a previous version of myself? Am I questioning what someone I look up to or admire might think of this? Those are all external forces, right? And perhaps you're working with, say, a producer or an agent or a manager or a team or other partners in this experience, and they have opinions and you're clashing on it. When you hit those walls, it is useful to take that step back and say, let's sleep on this, right? But then really asking yourself, does this feel like 100% true 100% of the time, to quote Byron Katie? Does this truly feel like my thoughts, or is this someone else's on this? Because when you feel confident about something, even confidently shit, like, it's just time to stop. You do. That's that frequency that I'm talking about. But when you're lacking the confidence, when you feel insecure, unsure, uncertain, you're seeking these kind of external points of validation. And that isn't going to feel finite. Like it's going to feel like this kind of like bottomless pit. Like I just need one more edit, opinion, piece of feedback, tweak, redo, right? Like that enoughness is again, that kind of frequency, and it will show up for everybody a little bit differently. So tune into like what feels like I will never be complete here because I'm constantly seeking something outside of myself to tell me it's done. Or like, when does this feel complete? So that's kind of like the darker, like ickier, more challenging side of that experience. The kind of lighter way more fun proof is like that flow, right? Like I was writing the other morning and I literally forgot what time it was. I could not for the life of me remember what day it was. So then I was just like off. Like I was like, is it a client day? Is it a meeting day? Do I have deadlines that like just in the zone? That's so much fun when you're in that creative space, right? And I'm going to talk about like actually creating that space as well, but we'll get there. When you're in that flow, keep going. And that's another thing about that structure, set parameters, but set parameters so that you know you're safe to go. Like I have calendar notifications. I have whole days where they're just really designed for flow. If there's anything else on that day and I actually flow through it, it's not that big of a deal. And most people who know me and have worked with me get it. I don't put my clients on that day. I don't put my deadlines on that day. Like I've set this structure up for myself so that I really can just go. And so how do you know when like you're tuned into that frequency of enoughness, of this is mine, this is an internal process? It's when you lose that space and time, when everything else gets kind of quiet. And of course, we all want to be there all of the time. But what I would say is if you're feeling quiet, as in like, I don't know where to from here, but it's not external, it's really calm. There's a book that I constantly refer back to. I'm going to put it in the Quantum Business Book Club this year when I get it. I mean, it's already back on track. It's happening. But I want to say it's called like The Art of Sustainability or The Sustainability of Art. But it's a collection of essays about artists who have been lifelong career artists, right? And there's one very well-known, very successful artist in there who talks about spending weeks laying on their couch staring at the ceiling. And they are very aware of the fact it looks like they're doing nothing. But in fact, what they're doing is creating their next big thing. So they're not in that comparisonitis, enoughness, tinkering, stressing, pushing, forcing. They're just letting that flow happen. It's just happening internally, right? And they're not questioning it. They've done it enough. They've got the experience behind them. They know that frequency of flow, and they don't have to justify it with the act of creating or the act of anything. And they kind of know they need that in order to act and create. And so that flow will slow. And then you kind of creep into that comparisonitis enough. Should I push myself harder? Should I go one more hour? Do I have another hour to go? When was the last time I ate? Blah, 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 blah. When those thoughts show up, they don't have to mean anything other than we're shifting from our like creative fifth gear and like high gear into a different gear. And this might be the end of this particular thing. Now that can be in the moment in creation. That can also be bigger picture. This project, this creation, this day, this relationship, this job, this commitment, blah, 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 right? So that is a very fine-tuned frequency. And it does take knowing you, and it does take space to tune into that, to truly feel it, because your ego will always tell you more, now, again, faster, harder, more, right? Like that's what it's actually for. That's not how do I want to phrase this? Like when it comes to innovative, inspired flow and creation, it's not necessarily coming from your brain. That's where like you tap into your skill set and the like strategies and tactile action items for sure. But that's just because it's your brain literally coordinating your physical, like dexterous, how you type and write and paint and build and connect and so on and so forth. So the creative process will not always feel good, right? So this is kind of point number 2. First one, just really being that like flow and that movement and just understanding the difference between like pushing yourself past a point of generative goodness into this place of like using force and fear to get you to keep going, or to get you to walk away, right? So now we get into this space of like, okay, it doesn't feel good. Because you always talk about, does it feel good or does it feel bad? This is bad. This is another very fine-tuned frequency, my friends, because bad can be like, I talk about it in terms of like nervous, like something bad is going to happen. Like I am in danger. Danger Will Robinson, or like, ooh, we're on the edge of something quite sharp here. This cuts. This is exciting. This is the butterflies in my stomach. This is like electric. That's when I talk about like feeling like the tingles and like the goosebumps and like my breath gets shallow. I could literally be describing like I'm getting chased down the alley by an axe murderer, or like I am about to like go down the hill on the roller coaster and it's going to be super fun. And I very much did this on purpose. Only you know the difference between those experiences, and they are very finely tuned. So can you allow that contraction of, I'm walking away from this. I'm done because I know I am. And despite whatever your ego, your mind, your external influencers are telling you, you start building that trust muscle of, look, I'll come back to this tomorrow. I'll come back to this after I eat some food or take a nap. I might also never come back to this again. This might never see the light of day. And when I was writing my notes on this, it was like, I mean, we hear this so often and it's so cliche and it's so fucking true. You will fail. You will get told this is insane. You will get told it is bad, unequivocally bad. And we hear about the artists. I always think about like The Queen's Gambit, that Netflix series. That writer pitched that as a television series in the 90s to the major TV networks. And they were like, no one will watch a show about chess. And they were competing with Friends and Seinfeld, right? Did that writer, did that artist think, okay, well, this idea is bad? No. They thought, okay, well, I'm going to tweak it. And they submitted that screenplay over 100 times over the course of a decade before the world, the distribution, and the people, let alone the actors and the resources, became available for right place, right time, and actual fucking creative magic occurred. That was like one of the highest watched episodic limited edition series on streaming media that had ever existed. Now, had that writer said, I got some negative feedback, I'm not doing this anymore, quit, we would never have seen it. And the world would have never have known. But they just knew. They had that frequency of knowing, and it probably felt like insanity. You know what I'm going to say next. Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, but he talks about, and I have a podcast episode about it, some of his biggest failures, right? And this is what I mean when I say, like, if it feels bad, that's okay. Let that worst case scenario be. You're walking away from this forever. It's going to ruin your career. You're a complete flop and everybody knows it. And then the next day, you create again. What if your biggest flop, your biggest failure, your biggest public humiliation is actually the foundation upon which you build your masterpiece? There's only one way to find out, my friend. And this isn't like the Dark Knight of the Cave, hero with 1,000 faces, Campbellian shadow work. Well, it's Jung shadow work, Campbellian, blah, blah, blah. This is just like, it doesn't have to be fucking dramatic. We don't have to make a big deal about this. You can just be fucking done with it. That's cool, man. And then tomorrow you can have a different experience with it. That's the fun thing about art. Like, not only can it show up like that for you, it can show up like that for everybody else. Like, one person is going to absolutely love what you do and think you're fucking brilliant, and not just your mom or your partner, right? You will have fans and you will have haters. Neither of them are right. Like, and I'm not going to get into that whole like dopamine, social media comments and support and blah, blah, blah. Look, if you love that shit, cool. But just recognize that's also external from you. Okay. And so when you just let your art be itself, its own thing, you created it, you birthed it into the world. Maybe some people saw it. Maybe they loved it. Maybe they didn't, because you never told anybody about it. And then you just get up the next day and do it all over again. That's how you're going to start to tune into these very fine-tuned frequencies. Does this feel bad because I know I can do better and this deserves more of me? Or does this feel bad because I'm letting external experiences tell me it is? Or does this feel bad because I'm just fucking done? how about it just, this is an experience, a feeling in this moment, and I'm going to give myself some space from it and I'll come back to it. And if when I come back to it, I'm not into it, I can create something completely new. I can assume I'm either going to come back to it at the exact right moment or it's done. Or it truly was something that can be improved upon. There's only, again, one way to figure that out, and keep playing with it, keep experimenting. Maybe it's done. Maybe it's trash. Maybe it's time to start something completely new. Maybe you look back at your entire repertoire of work and you revisit a period or a phase that you thought you had completely moved through. You get to play with this frequency of art and with creativity. So let's talk about how to actually do that. Only you know what you need to get to that space of play. So I'm going to lump it into 3 large categories. And I usually do this because we like choice. You know me, like it's always a multiple choice quiz. So if we get to 3, it feels like a little bit more playful than an either or. But in my experience, I have found there are people who just need to chip away at it. You just start. This is, you brainstorm, the first ideas are going to be shit. And then you push past that initial discomfort of the first 5 minutes to, let's say, an hour of everything sucks, I'm free writing and I have no brilliant or original ideas ever. But you just kind of know you need to push through because for whatever reason, you like to motivate yourself by shaming yourself. You've got a little bit of that sub energy in you, and that's fine, my friend. Keep it dark and dirty. Some of us, we like to have the space every day. It's a daily discipline. Stephen Pressfield talks a lot about this. A lot of, I would say older generation artists tend they create from 10 to 3. Or from 9 to 5, or from 5 to midnight. They kind of have their space and their time and their schedule, and that discipline works really well for them. They do all of the other stuff outside of that, but they show up at the same time, in the same space, in the same shirt, with the same perfume, and the same drink, and then they fucking create. It's very ritualized, right? It can look very disciplined to some of us that don't work like that, but that's what works for them, right? And then the last large category that I see the most often and I relate to very strongly is the batch processors, right? It's you kind of catch that wind and then you ride it until it fucking dies in the doldrums. And for that to happen, it's usually instigated by a deadline, by a sense of urgency. If you've got young kids, you kind of know what I mean. Those kids go to sleep and you're like, I have potentially 2 hours to get my entire life taken care of in this moment. And you respond well. This is why I say procrastination is a superpower, right? Some of us need those false deadlines, or we need the accountability, we need the appointment, or we need the catch up, or we've got somebody to report to, whether or not that person's our boss or our employee. But that energy kind of wakens something up in us. And I see this with a lot of career artists, just because you have the show time or the exhibition or the, deadline, you're not going to start until 3 days out. But then for those 36 hours of pure bliss and adrenaline, the best work comes out. So let's talk about how to manufacture each of those experiences. Scheduling, which may or may not be our strong points, but those space-time coordinates of I know the first 4 hours of my day are my most creative. Therefore, I'm going to get my ass out of bed and sit in front of my computer or my journal, and I'm going to fucking write. And it's just kind of what happens. And it's going to suck at first, and then I'm going to find a groove, and then that groove is going to disappear. Cool. That's the kind of chip away at it, just create that boundaried structure for yourself. And then you build that trust in that this is when this happens. And that looks a little bit like the more disciplined approach. The disciplined approach, I would say, is where you appreciate that ritual, and it's almost like a celebration. It truly, to me, feels like you're dating the creative muse. You've set up a play date and you're like, I'll make the tea. You bring the crumpets. Okay. But it also lends itself to someone whose real vocation and career is the creative work. And some of us get to use that creative flow in our work, but it's not 40 hours a week of just pure creation. That's where I think kind of the batch process, or I'm sorry, not the batch processing, but the like setting aside time to really tap into that creative energy and juice. And then we kind of get into like the rest of our lives. This is like our lives get to be the creative juice. And so you just set up that ritual and that structure for yourself. That's pretty bing, bang, boom. And really playing with, when does this show up? And then honoring that time. So again, for some of us, it's mornings. For some of us, it's evenings. Some of us, we get to do it Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but give yourself that space and that structure. And then for the more volatile of us that just love that false sense of urgency, or very real fucking sense of urgency and deadlines, and we procrastinate, we leave it to the last minute, but then we always kind of get it done and it feels alive and crazy. Just warn your friends and family, right? Like, hey, I might not eat or shower or be a responsible or contributing human being from your perspective for this amount of time. And helping manage the expectations, not just of those around you, but yourself. I'm not paying bills. I am not going to be able to show up to plans. If it's somebody's birthday, anniversary, emergency, don't call me. Like blocking out those spaces in your calendar, making them non-negotiables, that will give you permission to truly flow and play. And you'll be able to do it in a way that is safe and secure, where you're not interrupted, where you're not feeling guilty, which, as we know, takes away from our bandwidth of creative innovation and inspiration. So it really is just honoring like the best way that you work. Okay. So you create the space to create, and then you give yourself the structure to keep going. And what I mean by that is just rinse, wash, repeat. Once you create the space, test it, see what works best for you, and then actually like manage expectations around it. Block it on your calendar if you use a calendar. Share with your friends and family, anybody that's counting on you, the people that you work with. Like, this is how I work best. I recently heard it described as create a user manual for working with you, right? And then let it be its own thing. Once you get into that creative space, create, birth it, and then let it go. It might be something you come back to every year for a decade. It might be something you bet you invest everything into, and you get to the end and you're like, this was not it. Just let it be that thing. That's what is so brilliant about creativity and art and this creative work that we do, is it will evolve. Like, you birth it, you let it go, and then it will grow up and it will do its thing. And it might want your help, and it might want more of you. It might not. There's only one way to find out, right? And then you get to do it all over again. So my two favorite books on this, The Artist's Journey and the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I will point you to that podcast. But, I talk about this in terms of like powerhouse productivity and time master in the anti-business school. You work your way. And you get to set up your life and your days and your work in whatever way is going to suit you best. And if you feel like you don't have that choice and agency, I fucking promise you, the people in your life will allow you to do that when you prove to yourself that you create your best work with this support and belief and faith in yourself. So by giving yourself the opportunity to really play with, when do I create best? How do I know my ideas are worth taking seriously? And what do I need to do to understand that process of ideation and creation and completion? You, my friend, will, you'll know, you'll have the answer to your question in terms of, is this project done? Is it time to let it go and release it from my focal point? Or is this just something I need to take a pause from and come back to in the exact right moment? And I'll know when that is, and to keep building and iterating and improving it. I know I make it sound so easy, don't I? Yeah, I'm really good at that. If you've got questions, you want to keep riffing on this, I would love to. Email me hello@NicoleBZ.com, just like my friend who asked about this particular topic. Follow me on all of your favorite social platforms at the BZ channel. I'm trying to think if I've got any other resources. I always do. Go to the website, NicoleBZ.com, sign up for the loop, and I look forward to connecting again. Bye, my friend.